Over the course of 35 years and 20 plus games, we've seen a wide array of recurring groups and characters. Zora, Gorons, Rito, Koroks and more have all been brought back at least once to play a part in Link's adventure once again. And yet at the same time, there are also those who've only been featured in one game and are never seen again after that, save for some small references and nothing more. Which brings us to the Minish, also known as the Picori to the Hylians. Though, fun fact, this is actually unique to the English version of Minish Cap alone. Yes, for the other language versions, including Japanese, this distinction doesn't exist, and both Hylians and Minish use the same name. I have no idea why they decided to change this for the English version, but let's just say it wouldn't be the first time that Nintendo of America altered, omitted, or inserted their own ideas into a Zelda game. The Minish are one of my personal favorite creatures in the entire series. Tiny, thumb-sized beings who resemble anthropomorphic mice, and made their debut in 2004's The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. They remind me a lot of the Borrowers from Arrietty, which as of right now is in my top 5 Miyazaki films. However, unlike the Borrowers, the Minish are completely invisible to most people. In that regard, they have a lot more in common with the Koroks, who are also said to be invisible except to those who are pure of heart, particularly children. But a big difference between the Koroks and the Minish is that their origin is not found inside the Kingdom of Hyrule, but rather a mysterious dimension called the Minish Realm. They even have their own highly complex language.
Picori copi, picoco copi.
Picoreki poco tipoa.
Picco picori. Riperi picco picori.
Riperi picco picori.
Picori picco.
Pikachu!
Funnily enough, they are perhaps most famous for being the ones responsible as to why Link keeps finding rupees and other trinkets hidden inside grass and empty jars, as it's said to be their way of offering gifts and good fortune to the Hylians. Something that before this game was just a funny, unexplained staple of the Zelda series. But their influence on Hyrule cannot be underestimated and goes far beyond just leaving behind small collectibles. Despite their size, they've had a huge impact on the outcome of events in the battle between good and evil. Mostly for the better, but in one particular case for the worst. Being one of my favorite Zelda creatures, I had honestly given up all hope that we would ever see them again. Nintendo has had plenty of opportunities to bring them back, as there are no less than 7 games which were released after the Minish Cap. You can also imagine my disappointment when I found out that Nintendo did actually have plans to include a race of tiny beings in the latest Zelda epic, Breath of the Wild, but was ultimately scrapped to meet the deadline. Link would have had the ability to shrink down to their size and interact with them, similar to the 2004 Game Boy Advance title, something which probably required too much additional programming to get it done in time. Remember, Breath of the Wild was already delayed like 4 times. Now it only exists as yet another idea of what could have been, hidden away in developer notes and a single screenshot. But then something happened which at the time wasn't something most people were expecting. A direct sequel to Breath of the Wild was announced, one of only a few direct sequels in the Zelda timeline. Not only that, but it stars the same main characters and takes place in the same world no less, which is actually a first for the series. So knowing what we know now, are there any hints or at least possible story implications that would warrant the return of Hyrule's tiniest heroes? Well, yes, and surprisingly more than you would think. The first and most obvious one, of course, being the fact that, as stated before, there were Minish-like beings conceptualized for Breath of the Wild, and Nintendo is definitely no stranger to taking discarded ideas and carrying them over to the next installment. But that kind of speaks for itself, and on its own it's not exactly convincing evidence, as there are many ideas which didn't make it into Breath of the Wild, and I highly doubt we'll see all of them implemented in the sequel. So what else is there? Well, let's start with trivia, story, and lore connections. Although taking place in the same overworld as its predecessor, Breath of the Wild 2 has been revealed to take place, at least partially, in the skies above Hyrule. As of yet, we still don't know what exactly this place is, but many are speculating that this isn't just high above Hyrule, but perhaps a different realm altogether. Reason being is that in Breath of the Wild, as well as the footage from the sequel trailer where Link is on the surface, the Sky Islands are nowhere to be seen. But how does this relate to the Minish? Well, the Minish realm is said to reside in the heavens, or at least close to it. This is depicted as such in Hyrule Historia, but it's also told to us in the backstory to Minish Cap. Sometime between Skyward Sword and Minish Cap, when Hyrule was being plagued by evil, the Minish appeared from the heavens, gifting the Hylians a sword known as the Picori Blade, and a golden light, which is implied to be the Triforce, I guess, or at least part of it, but we'll cover that in a different video. Over the course of Minish Cap's adventure, this legendary blade is first broken, then reforged by the Minish, and subsequently infused with 4 elements by Link himself, and henceforth became known as the Four Sword thereafter. Canonically, this is the same blade featured in Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures. The existence of the Four Sword is not irrelevant when it comes to the possible story of Breath of the Wild 2, believe it or not, and this has everything to do with the return of everyone's favorite pigman, Ganondorf. As of today, it's still not confirmed which timeline Breath of the Wild follows up on, but Ganondorf being back in his human form rather than his alter ego Ganon has led to many people leaning more and more towards the child timeline. I'm not gonna get too deep into why, as that is a video on its own, and I'm not even making the claim that the child timeline is without a doubt where Breath of the Wild belongs, but it has mostly to do with the fact that the corpse we see in the Breath of the Wild 2 teaser has similar characteristics of that of Ganondorf from Twilight Princess, as well as the fact that this is the only timeline where we visually saw the Demon King transforming into Malice, something that is referred to in Creating a Champion. Here's the problem though. According to the official Zelda timeline, Twilight Princess isn't the last game in the child branch to feature Ganondorf, but instead Four Swords Adventures. Here, Ganondorf has been reincarnated into his human Gerudo form, transforms into Ganon, and is last seen being sealed inside the Four Sword. So if Nintendo wants to keep at least some story consistency, and Breath of the Wild and its sequel take place in the child timeline, technically Ganon should be inside the Four Sword, unless he broke free from it somewhere between Four Swords Adventures and Breath of the Wild. Which is possible, but then what happened to the Four Sword and where is it now? Of course, it could be that Nintendo decides to totally ignore this part of Zelda's history. Heck, many people even doubt if Four Swords Adventures timeline placement is accurate and should perhaps be placed somewhere else. But unless Nintendo ever updates the timeline, it remains where it is now, at the end of the child branch. Next is visual hints from the recent E3 trailer for the sequel. First off, we have a shield which Link is seen carrying that has a symbol on it that is eerily similar to that of Vati, the main antagonist from Minish Cap. If this symbol turns out to be more than just a little reference, this could be huge in terms of a possible return of the Minish. Not only was Vati the main antagonist in the game which first introduced the Minish, but he is one himself, or at least he was before transforming into a demon. Vati is also the only main Zelda antagonist to have directly interacted with Ganon. Sure, Ganon has interacted with other villains before, like Zant, Twin Rova, General Onox, and Varon, but these all turned out to be side villains in their own respective games, and in service of Ganon. Vati is the only one who played the role of main antagonist devoid of Ganon's presence, only to meet him in a later game. He's a lot more ancient than Ganon, preceding him by many millennia, and is actually the first prominent demon to make an appearance in Hyrule after Demise's curse is uttered in Skyward Sword. Vati also has a close connection to the Four Sword, as he's been sealed inside it no less than 2 times. Obviously, I'm not saying that Vati will be present in Breath of the Wild 2, but the fact that we find a possible reference to him does make a return of the Minish more probable. After all, who made this shield? And how does anybody even remember Vati after all this time? Another possible connection to the Minish are the green robot creatures seen in the second teaser. It's not like we haven't seen robots before in Breath of the Wild, but it's obvious that the ones seen here are very different from the Sheikah-made Guardians. The Minish Cap details that the Minish have created automata in the past. The game features these robotic soldiers, and one of the Minish in this area explains that they themselves built these machines to help the humans in their fight against evil. These mechanical soldiers are also almost exclusively found inside the Wind Ruins, which have a connection to a tribe that used to live here and have since built their new home in the sky. And now here we find robots who reside in the sky. There's also something else I want to mention, and I do realize that this is definitely a stretch. But remember those weird reversed vocals we hear in the 2 teasers? Well, in the Japanese, German, and Italian versions of Minish Cap, the Minish actually speak in reverse. And although not canon, this trait was even carried over to the English version of the Minish Cap manga. Again, a huge stretch, I know, but I still felt like it was at least worth mentioning. The next exhibit is not in the form of story or visual elements, but in the form of a man. Hidemaru Fujibayashi, director of Breath of the Wild, Skyward Sword, and Minish Cap, as well as the guy behind the stories of Oracle of Ages and Seasons when he was still working at Capcom. It's clear from Fujibayashi's track record that he likes to tell stories, and in particular, origin stories. The man himself has, on camera no less, expressed regret that the idea of Minish-like creatures in Breath of the Wild did not make it in. It even shows footage of the Minish Cap as he talks about the subject.
3D のゲームなので、小さい町があったりして、リンク自身が小さくなったりしたらどうだろうなと。 いうようなアイデアもあって、じゃあ至る所にそういう小さい、キャラクターがいたらすごく楽しいんじゃないかと思ってたんですけれども、やっぱりそれも、他のキャラクターがすごく立っている中で小人だけっていうとどうしても少しそのキャラクターだと、ゲームの中で、生きていく幅っていうのが少し少ないなっていうことが分かってきたので、ちょっと遊びとしてはすごくやりたかったんですが、泣く泣くカットになった種族だったりしますね。
Since he'll be returning as director for the upcoming sequel as well, there is a chance that he will go out of his way to secure their inclusion this time around. And since the sequel will reuse the same engine, there will be a lot more time to make it happen. Fujibayashi is the one who came up with Vati, the Four Sword, and the Minish, so I'd imagine he would be delighted to incorporate more of the lore he created into the game, especially considering that Breath of the Wild was already packed with references to Skyward Sword, most of which he created as well, at least story-wise. This leaves us with one final question. If the Minish would make a comeback in Breath of the Wild 2, how exactly would that work in terms of gameplay, and what kind of connection could they have to the main story? In Minish Cap, Link could shrink in size due to Eslo, a cursed Minish who possesses powerful magic. He is seen casting runes around Link, after which he shrinks down to Minish size. However, the game never states that this is the only way to achieve this. In fact, it specifically says that the Hylians and Minish used to have a much closer connection, and even met with each other regularly. Not only that, but apparently even adults were able to see them back then. But over time, the two races grew apart for unknown reasons. It's clear that Eslo's magic power is not unique in this regard. The ancient Hylians had magic of their own, which allowed them to speak to the Minish at the Deepwood Shrine, which is said to have served as sort of a meeting point for the two races. And perhaps in Breath of the Wild 2, the magical abilities Link receives from his afflicted arm could allow him to shrink as well. And as a final stray thought, is it me or does Link's appearance in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer look a bit similar to the ancient Hylian hero of men? Especially the hairstyle, but I don't know, I'm probably making connections that aren't there. Anyway, there is a lot more to talk about when it comes to the Minish, but I'll save that for a follow-up video where I will talk more about the Golden Light and some other ideas I have about this era. I think the idea of becoming small could really work for Breath of the Wild 2. It was already a joy to see Hyrule from a different perspective in Minish Cap, the way normal, everyday objects suddenly serve as tools, obstacles, or even houses. Now imagine that, but in full 3D. It would also be yet another way to make Breath of the Wild's Hyrule feel brand new again, despite the fact that we've already explored this world. Even if the Minish don't show up, I at least hope that there will be some references to them, as there weren't that many in Breath of the Wild. But the Minish are a crucial part of Hyrule's history in my opinion. They forged a powerful sword, one of a few besides the Master Sword capable of defeating Ganon. They bestowed powerful magic upon the Hylians in their time of need, and as far as races go, they might just be the one who reside closest to the gods. Before ending the video, I want to give a shout out to Banune, who gifted me an amazing homemade Minish figurine, as well as an awesome oil painting of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. I cannot express enough how thankful I am for this, and well, humbled that you would want to give me such an amazing piece of artwork, which I'm guessing took quite a while to make. If you're interested in one of these figurines or other types of Zelda art yourself, there's a link to their Twitter and Facebook in the description if you want to check it out. Not a sponsorship, by the way, just a way to help a fellow artist who's been so generous with me. So again, a big thanks to Banune. Rest assured that this little guy will be sitting comfortably on my shelf for many, many years to come. Additionally, a big thanks to all of you for watching, to my mods, my Patreons and members who continue to make my content possible, and to Clifford Longhead, Jaya Alexander, and Mika for joining the crew. It is, as always, much appreciated. And that is all for now. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.